Bom dia a todos. Quero agradecer a presença de todos aqui para a gente falar um pouquinho sobre tendências tecnológicas que impactam o mundo. E nada melhor que a Elizabeth para falar disso, ela que é CEO do MIT Technology Review. E é uma referência nessas tendências tecnológicas e uma das líderes do pensamento por trás dessa modernização dos modelos de negócio e culturas corporativas. Seja bem-vinda, Elizabeth Branson-Brudot. Espero ter acertado o nome, né? Que eu ensaiei bastante, então espero ter acertado.
Yes,
Elizabeth.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Mr. Molinari, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Seja bem-vinda ao Brasil e a São Paulo, tá?
Thank you.
Elizabeth, a tecnologia, como a gente sabe, ela está mudando toda a nossa forma de viver, a forma de a gente relacionar na sociedade, a forma da educação, do trabalho e também das nossas finanças, a forma como a gente relaciona, inclusive, com os bancos, que é um pouco o tema aqui do FEBRABAN TECH. O MIT há décadas estuda sobre tendências tecnológicas e vocês têm um estudo que fala sobre isso. E a gente queria abordar nesse estudo 3 grandes tendências. Uma é sobre tecnologias disruptivas. É claro que quando a gente fala de tecnologias disruptivas, vamos ter que falar um pouquinho de inteligência artificial, sobre inclusão digital e sociedade. E o terceiro item para a gente falar hoje é sobre tecnologias verdes e sustentabilidade. Então, para começar, você poderia falar um pouquinho para a gente sobre o MIT Technology Review, que você conduz?
Yes. I wonder if I could get my slides up. So I have some pictures to share with you. So I'll very quickly say that MIT Technology Review is an independent media company. We are owned by MIT. That's the MIT main building on the campus. We sit just on the edge of the campus, and our team, my team, is made up of journalists who are looking every day at new technologies that are just being developed, that are coming out of labs and research centers and entering the marketplace. So that's things like artificial intelligence, climate and energy, biotechnology, robotics, computing. Our team is always looking at the new developments that people need to be thinking about and aware of. We publish every day on a website, technologyreview.com. We have a number of newsletters that we send out to, email newsletters that we send out about AI, about biotechnology, climate tech. And we have a magazine, a print magazine, that comes out twice every second month, so 6 times a year. And we also have a Brazilian edition, and it's published in Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, and that is at mittechreview.com.br. So they also have an app. So I would really encourage you all to go there and to visit our website and our Brazilian partner's website and read what we're producing on a regular basis. It's a great topic, and I know it's of interest to this audience.
Ok. Há muitas tendências tecnológicas surgindo, elas nos surpreendem em alguns instantes, em outros momentos elas saem de foco. Qual que você poderia dizer para nós? Quais são as tendências que mais têm acelerado e quais perderam força recentemente?
Yeah. So one of the things that we do at MIT Technology Review each year is we produce a list of the 10 breakthrough technologies. So those are the 10 technologies that in a particular year, 2025, the reporters and the journalists believe these technologies are going to have the greatest impact on the way we live and the way we work. They've been doing this, the company's been doing this since 2001, this is before I started working there, and still doing it in much the same way 24 years later. And so sometimes there are, so those are some covers of the magazine over the years that we produced that have the list of the 10 breakthrough technologies in there. But all of the reporters go and they put together a list of the technologies that they think are going to be the most important. In the editorial team, the reporters, they all have a big argument that lasts, a number of weeks and months, and they work on this, and the editor-in-chief makes a final decision about what technologies should be on the list. And it's an incredibly exciting list. There are technologies on this list that, if you go back to 2001, we've picked some really good ones. We've turned out to have been really prescient and smart. There are some that we picked that were not so great. And just on that list of things that we picked that turned out to not be so smart, we thought social TV in 2010, for instance. We thought social TV, watching TV with your friends in a kind of virtual space, we thought that was going to be really big. And during the pandemic, it did happen, and I certainly remember my teenagers watching shows with their friends, particularly during the pandemic, but it's nowhere near what we said that it was going to. We also had Magic Leap on the list in 2015. That was about an augmented reality headset, and that didn't turn out to be the technology that mattered. Snap and Microsoft and Apple have taken that technology a lot further. But I can now tell you, the list of the technologies that we think are going to be most important and that we're talking about here this year in 2025. And so that's the list. That's the whole list. I am not going to talk about all 10 because I don't have time, and we're going to have a nice discussion. But I will tell you a little bit about a few of them that I think connect to the themes of our conversation. So the first thing on the list is the Vera C. Rubin Observatory. That's in Chile, and that's a new astronomical observatory in Chile that has the largest digital camera ever built. It's about the size of a car. And it is going to be capturing details of the cosmos never before seen. And it's going to be, an unbelievable way of opening up a greater understanding about this galaxy and this creation of our universe than we've ever had. I'm not going to talk about that. That's not the kind of interest that you all may have. What instead I will talk about are the others on the list. I'll start with generative AI search. I think you all have had the experience of generative AI search. That's ChatGPT, that's Anthropic. Search companies like Google and Microsoft are beginning to integrate generative AI into their search engines. So, you've had the experience where you go to Google and it gives you the answer that says, AI overview answer, and so you don't actually have to click through to the site that you might have previously gone to get the answer to your question. You're getting the answer right there in the chat bot, be it ChatGPT or Anthropic or AI overview in Google. And it's generated for you in that moment. It's not a script. The answer is generated. That's why they call it generative AI. It's happening not only in search engines, it's of course happening in chatbots, in apps, directly on your phone. There will be a step towards agentic AI. Useful agents, agent AI, that will go out onto the internet and complete tasks for you on your behalf. So you're booking a holiday, you have an agent that will go and that agent knows what hotels you like to stay in. Let's say you like eco-tourism. And it knows exactly what you want, the kind of pillow you need to make sure is ready for you on your bed. What kind of, whether you want a sea view or a mountain view. It will also tell your friends who live in that area, if you want them to, I'm going to be in town and I want to see you and have dinner. That's what that's the kind of decision making that agents will be doing for us. And it's coming very, very quickly. Now, the caveat around generative AI search is that these models don't actually know if what they're telling you is true. They are regurgitating the internet. They're predicting the next word in a sentence to fill the gaps. So you don't know always if the answers you get from generative AI search are correct. And that is, of course, a big concern and a big risk for all of us. When we look at the importance of knowing what truth is, what facts are. I come from MIT, I come from higher education, I come from a world of science and facts. And when we are less and less trusting of the information that we get on the internet, it's a risk for all of us. The second technology I'm going to talk about is small language models. So you've heard about large language models. That's most of what we're talking about with AI. Small language models are growing in importance. They do not use as much training data. That's why they're small. They don't use as many parameters in the models. And the values that they calculate, the parameters are the values that they use to calculate the results. And they have a smaller set of values. And they're more suited to a specific purpose. So let's imagine you run a law firm and you write a lot of contracts in your law firm. You don't need to use a large language model that is trained on all the films that Disney has produced. It's not necessary. The Disney movies are not necessary. You need a model that has trained on the law and contracts in particular. And because they use fewer parameters and they're smaller, they're less expensive to create and to run. They're more efficient. They produce fewer emissions. They can work offline. That you can use them on your devices much more easily. And some of them, they're finding are performing much better actually than the large language models. So the other breakthroughs on that list of 10, there was also robo-taxis. There was also faster learning robots. All of those things are using and developing these advances in AI. I'm not going to talk about those, though. I'm going to instead move on to sustainability and burping cows. I hope that the translator knows the word for burping in Portuguese, because it's really important. So we are seeing more and more exciting answers to our sustainability and decarbonization problems. And let's start by talking about the burps from cows. So cows burp a lot, and they burp up methane. And methane is a byproduct of digestion, and it is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. It is a very, very problematic greenhouse gas. And the burps from cows is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. So because of this, there's a lot of effort, I'm sure it's widespread here as well as in the United States, to get people to eat less meat, right? Eat synthetic meat, go vegan, whatever. The question is that realistic? As the world gets wealthier, people are going to be consuming more beef, and it's not perhaps realistic to expect people to stop consuming beef. So there are companies who are developing food and water supplements that will prevent cows from giving off so much methane in the first place. And there's a company called Bovir that is available in countries, 55 countries, and they can reduce emissions by about 30% in dairy cows. There's others that are doing things using red seaweed to reduce the methane output of cows by about 50 to 80%. Another one is, I'm going to start to move more quickly here, but it's cleaner jet fuel. So I flew here from the United States, a really long airplane flight. We all know that aviation is an area where it's been really hard to reduce emissions. There's been biofuels for a long time, but there's more work now being done on creating alternative jet fuels. Some of these are using carbon dioxide captured from the air, adding water, and then using electricity and a metal catalyst to split this, and they can make fuel using these different chemicals. And there's a US company called 12 that is doing that. There's another company called LanzaJet that has been doing a number of test flights using using municipal and industrial waste, as well as ethanol made from sugar or sugarcane or corn. So there's a lot that's been going on here. There's not only the production of these fuels, but there's been a lot of regulatory improvement to support this. You know, I know that in Brazil there's something called the Fuel of the Future law. Obviously, policy is a really important part of the puzzle. Green steel. Steel is a huge producer of, creation of steel is a huge producer of carbon. And so there's more work being done to use hydrogen to make iron from iron ore, which is the dirtiest step in the steel making process. A company called Boston Metal, it's from Boston, comes out of the academic world that I inhabit. They are working on commercializing an electrical process that runs a current through a mixture of iron ore and an electrolyte, and that separates out the purified iron, and does this all using renewable fuel. I mean, a huge innovation in terms of the built environment that is such a huge producer of carbon. Now, I'm going to switch to talking about health. And if we look at emerging technologies, what I find so exciting about the science and the innovation coming out of the technology and you know, the biomedical world is what it might mean for health of all of us, ourselves, our communities, you know, our children, our children's children. There are two really significant breakthroughs that I'm going to talk about. One is long-acting HIV prevention medications. There has been some HIV prevention medications available for some time, but you have to take them on a regular basis, and you have to take them before a risk of an exposure. A new medicine called lenacapavir by a company called Gilead has a drug that it is administered by injection that lasts for 6 months and prevents the infection of HIV for 6 months. So then you get another shot. It prevents the infection for another 6 months. They did a trial, Gilead, of 5,000 women and girls in Uganda and South Africa last year. And that drug was 100% effective in preventing the infection of HIV. Huge innovation, huge improvement for us. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about stem cell therapies. So stem cells, you know, stem cells have been a topic of scientific research for decades. But now they are becoming more powerful, and they can be created using any kind of tissue. You don't have to just use embryonic tissue. One of our reporters has a really remarkable story about a patient who had epilepsy, regular seizures, and began taking a trial through a company called Neurona Therapeutic that he received neurons that had been developed in a laboratory that fixed the electrical signaling that was causing his seizures. He now only has, he was having them multiple times a day, he now only has them kind of on a couple times a month, which is still seizures, but it's a significant reduction. There's another example, type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes patients have to monitor their blood sugar all the time to make sure, because they don't produce insulin. There have been trials by a number of different companies that have scientists taking stem cells in the lab and turning them into the kind of cells that produce insulin, and then putting those cells into the body of the diabetes patient, and those patients are now able to produce insulin on their own again. So we are on the cusp of really being able to cure some pretty debilitating disease, and we are probably just getting started. Now, I went through that all really, really quickly. The rest of the list, you know, you'll have to explore on the website. I hope you will. You can learn more about the ones I talked about and also about the ones I did not. Ultimately, though, I think these sorts of innovations give us all a lot to be optimistic for. I will say that the ultimate impact, we know this, but the ultimate impact of a technology is not just about the technologists. It's not just about the brainy people coming up with the solutions. It's about the society that we live in and the policy that enables, you know, these technologies to be developed, the business conditions of the economies we work in. And so that's part of why I'm so excited to talk to you and to be in front of this audience. So thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting with you.
Elizabeth, bom, primeiro parabéns pelo trabalho, realmente é muito abrangente e eu queria explorar um pouquinho mais alguns desses tópicos, eu acho que começar um pouquinho, claro, sobre tecnologias disruptivas e vamos falar um pouquinho sobre inteligência artificial. A gente vê ela avançando e continua nos surpreendendo ano após ano. E eu queria que você desse a sua opinião sobre a sua visão do que você pensa que a IA, seja ela generativa, agentes, multiagentes, como é que ela vai estar daqui a 5 anos e como que ela vai afetar a sociedade, principalmente assim, quais os setores que você vê que vão ser mais impactados? E ainda, assim, olhando aquele hype cycle, que pé que a gente está? Em que momento que a gente está da inteligência artificial no hype cycle?
Yeah. So, question there about sort of what we think, is going to be most important in AI over the next, say, 5 years, but also where is AI in the hype cycle? So, very quickly for people who are interested in the hype cycle, there's sort of this idea that in the beginning of a technology, you have sort of the trigger, the innovation trigger. That's when the technology begins to come out of the laboratories and people start to play around with it. And then there becomes this peak of inflated expectations. They call it the peak of inflated expectations. So that's when everybody starts talking about how game-changing this is going to be, and it's everybody, that's when people start worrying about bubbles, whether this is really going to be as transformative. And then there's the trough of disillusionment. That's when it's the disappointment and the reality sets in. And then there's a new slope of enlightenment, and that's when people say, oh, no, it's not going to be what we said it was going to be, it's going to be this other thing. And then this sort of last stage in a hype cycle is the plateau of productivity, and that's really when a technology really starts to be used and really starts to impact productivity. So, I think one of the things that we're most interested in thinking about generative AI over the next 5 years or so is, I think, first of all, I think it's going to impact every industry. There's from creative industries, from the business world, from finance and banking. It's really going to be, massively far-reaching. In terms of the innovations that we think are going to be most important, I already mentioned small language models. We are paying a lot of attention right now at the energy costs of AI, because AI, the data centers used to drive AI and large language models, they consume a massive, massive amount of energy, and they're being built. Massive data centers are being built all the time. We recently published an article about data centers being constructed in outside of Las Vegas, in Nevada. That's a desert. And we're talking about massive, massive data center in a place where there's actually very little water. So there's a lot of need to bring water in to fuel this and cool this data center. So there's a tremendous amount of kind of resources being, natural resources and financial resources being thrown into AI, and there's going to need to be a reckoning around how we can build out AI and all benefit from AI without doing so at the cost of our planet. I think another thing is there's going to be much more faster speeding up of discovery in sciences. So there was a Nobel Prize given to the team who were doing protein folding using AI. And there's, I think, a tremendous unlocking of innovation around new technology, new drug discovery, new protein discovery that can do quite a lot to help all of us who care about people with disease. May ourselves come down with a disease or have people in our lives who become ill. We're going to see some interesting things in generative virtual worlds that are created by generative AI. Google's DeepMind model, Genie 2, can take a text prompt and turn it into a sketch, and then turn it into an interactive 3D environment, just like that. And so that's going to help, of course, with video gaming, if you care about video gaming. But more than that, it's going to help train robots in virtual worlds. that sort of spatial intelligence will allow robots to learn much more quickly, and we're going to have a situation where we're going to see a lot more advances around robotics, particularly humanoid robotics, which, you know, is kind of great, kind of scary. And you know, you know better than I do the impact that AI is having in finance. That's certainly going to continue. It's, you know, been used for a long time in functions like credit scoring and fraud detection and you know, things of that sort. I know that you know, I was talking with one of the reporters about JP Chase had a AI tool that during the market turmoil of President Trump's tariff announcements, you know, every day it was, every hour it was another tariff, and that was changing. And remember how it wasn't even that long ago, but it feels like it was a lifetime ago. Remember how we were watching the market and thinking, what in the world is going on? You know, and it was changing, you know, all the time. But this tool that the team at JP Chase was using enabled its wealth management clients to benefit very, very quickly from the fluctuations. So there's going to be a lot of that. So the question of the hype cycle, you know, I know there are many people who say we're in kind of this trough of disillusionment, and you know, there are a lot of people that I speak to in events like this who are kind of in the feeling of overwhelm. I know I'm supposed to be doing more with AI, but I'm not exactly sure how. I'm getting a lot of pressure, but I'm not sure if I'm doing the right things. I think what I have experienced is a lot of people in the sort of chief technology and the chief innovation officer roles understand that they need to do more, and they're concerned about competing, but they're not entirely sure what to do. But I do think that we're going to very quickly, very soon, get ourselves to that sort of slope of enlightenment. I think we're coming out of that trough of disillusionment because it's becoming clearer and clearer what some of the applications could be. So that's what I would say, is we're sort of moving out of that trough and into a new sort of slope of enlightenment. But I am by nature an optimistic person, so you may have a different perspective on that.
Sobre esse ponto que você colocou mais no final, a respeito sobre... Há uma discussão muito grande sobre como é que ela vai impactar o nosso trabalho, né? O futuro do trabalho, novas profissões. Eu tenho um filho de 14 anos, ele me pergunta também algumas vezes sobre isso, o que ele deve estudar, eu tenho dúvidas sobre isso também. Como é que você vê esse impacto da IA sobre o mercado de trabalho agora e no futuro?
Yeah, I mean, I have a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old. And so I, like you, as a parent, you know, am trying to help them think about where they want to find them, what their careers might look like, and how they can make the best choices. And what I say to them, and I actually would say this to all of us, that the most important thing, I think, in terms of how one conducts themselves at work is don't be the person who's fighting tech. Do not put yourself in a situation where you're trying to keep technology out of your job, because you will lose. You will lose that fight. Instead, be the person who is embracing it and who says to your manager, your boss, your CEO, whoever it is, honestly, I'm not quite sure how to manage that technology, or I'm not quite sure how that technology should be used in this, you know, in this situation or in this job, but I will work on it. I want to learn. What I always say is that if you're not open to embracing technology, you're going to lose out to someone who is. So better to be the person who says, I'm going to figure this out. I do pay attention to what the economists say. There are two MIT economists and Nobel laureates who won the Nobel Prize last year, Daron Acemoglu and Simon Johnson, who have done a lot of work on AI's impact on labor. And you know, there's some people who say, okay, look, let's just accept it. Jobs are going to be lost, and let's move towards a universal basic income. And Acemoglu and Johnson, they say, no, that's a defeatist approach. We have the ability as leaders, as policymakers, as company leaders, as CEOs, et cetera, as citizens, we have the ability to ensure that, to push, advocate for the technology to go in the direction that we want it to go. This is sort of society that we want to live in. We don't have to just accept it. And throughout history, technological advances have immiserated people. But when the right policies are in place, they don't have to. So Acemoglu and Johnson say that society needs to steer AI away from being used for things like automation and surveillance, and instead to use it to augment the talent in the human intelligence. And I think that's a very compelling argument. And that puts us in a role as agents, not recipients, but we can be drivers in the kind of future that we want to have.
Ok. Deixa eu mudar pouquinho de assunto, eu vou ir para outro tema, que a gente vai falar pouquinho sobre inclusão digital e como é que isso afeta a sociedade, né? Tem a ver, claro, obviamente com IA, mas olhando pouquinho mais amplo, né? Inclusão digital ela é essencial hoje para o mundo. O Brasil mesmo tem um país muito heterogêneo, você tem em determinados pontos do país acessos diferentes a tecnologias. Então eu queria perguntar para você quais barreiras que a gente ainda precisa superar para alcançar essa inclusão digital global. E se tu tem algum exemplo que você pode trazer do mundo, né, de iniciativa global que se entenda que mereça esse destaque, que conseguiu sucesso nessa inclusão digital.
Yeah, so look, that's obviously incredibly important, and it's only getting more important as you consider the speed of AI and the development of AI, and people who do not have the access, who are not included, there's a tremendous risk that they will fall even further and further behind, and it will become, maybe impossible to catch up. From what I understand, the way I think about it, inclusion kind of encompasses a number of things. So it's reaching people who are poor, who might live in remote places, or who might not be able-bodied, disabled in some fashion. And it also means sharing the opportunities that digital technologies create. So the first step in that is connectivity. So we know that there's undersea fiber optic cable that brings the internet to around the world. Landlocked countries tend to be have more in remote areas have more challenges. They're not as connected as other countries. There's satellite internet. That's one answer. Starlink is reaching about 5 million people in 100 countries. There's Amazon has Project Kuiper, which is also going to be offering satellite internet later this year. Alphabet has a spin-off called Tara that is using tower-based optical technologies to connect rural areas. They're saying that they can do that for much cheaper than the satellite from a Starlink, for instance. You can see, beyond connectivity, there is more investment going into digital public infrastructure that can spread the digital economy far and wide. That's systems for digital ID, digital payments, data exchange, consent. I think there's some interesting advancements here in Brazil of that sort. And then there's, accessibility for the disabled, people who are not as able-bodied. What's interesting is that list of 10 technologies that we produce every year, we also open up to our readers the opportunity to vote for an 11th. So we give them, I think, 4 choices, and they can choose. And they overwhelmingly chose, this year, brain-computer interfaces. So that's like Neuralink, which Elon Musk is behind. There's other companies. There's a company based in New York called Synchron. There's a Chinese company called Neuroscience. These are amazing. These are implants in the brain that can make the brain function in ways that it no longer, because of a brain injury, because of some sort of situation in that individual's brain. People with severe paralysis are regaining the ability to move their body, out of, because of the use of this technology. I mean, it's really remarkable. Sometimes it's an invasive surgery, but it's not always. It doesn't have to be an invasive surgery. So I think that's a piece of accessibility that's about giving the ability for people who are not able-bodied to move and operate in the world like others. So those are some examples.
Nossa, impressionante. Elizabeth, eu queria trazer agora para um lado das empresas, como é que elas se preparam para ofertar serviços cada vez mais fáceis e acessíveis, né, em todos os aspectos. Nós estamos vendo hoje um momento que você tem várias gerações com diferentes níveis de habilidade de uso de tecnologia e todas elas consumindo serviços simultaneamente. Então, como é que as empresas elas se preparam, como é que elas podem ofertar, que tecnologias elas podem usar para que a gente consiga ofertar o produto e que seja acessível do ponto de vista digital, independente da habilidade do usuário?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's some really interesting ways that actually AI can help. I feel like I keep talking. I'll spend the next 5 years of my career talking about AI. That's where we are. But there are some very, very exciting things that can be done with AI chatbots, for instance, to enable one to connect with customers, a company to connect with customers. I'm absolutely positive, although I can't speak Portuguese, I'm absolutely positive that there's a lot of things that you're doing at the bank that would fall into that category. I mean, there's also just general accessibility to, at MIT Technology Review, we make sure that all of our content is available to anyone who may have trouble moving a mouse, typing. We follow the World Wide Web Consortium's web accessibility guidelines. But I think more broadly, it's really about asking your users, asking your customers, what are the best ways, what are the challenges they have in using your technology, and that's I think you're going to get a pretty, depending on the country or the market you're operating in, you're going to get maybe a wider range of answers here in Brazil than you might in other countries. But I ultimately think that there are certain tools like AI that can help to sort of balance out the accessibility side. That it can enable one to manage their bank accounts with a very simple app in ways that 3-4 years ago would have looked incredibly advanced and complicated.
Perfeito. Deixa eu mudar de novo o tópico para tentar explorar mais um outro item, que é sobre tecnologias verdes e sustentabilidade, né? Muito da tecnologia evolui muito rápido. Você falou inclusive do aspecto da IA, quanto que ela consome, né, de recursos naturais, e essa evolução ela tem que andar meio junto com o planeta, porque senão não vai fazer muito sentido, né? A gente precisa pensar na prioridade das empresas, mas também do planeta. Esse ano, inclusive, eu botei uma trilha aqui na FEBRABAN Tech que fala sobre ESG, e esse ano a gente vai ter a COP30 no Brasil, né? Então eu queria explorar um pouquinho como é que você vê o papel das tecnologias verdes na mitigação de mudanças climáticas, né? E como é que o sistema financeiro, de alguma maneira, pode ajudar nesse cenário, né? E quais inovações que você entende que seriam as mais promissoras nesse sentido?
Look, I think this is I don't know, I think this is a vitally important topic. It makes a lot of sense that it's something to be talking about now, because you are here in Brazil looking to COP30 in a few months, 6 months, I guess. I think that there've been some very exciting advances in these hard to abate sectors, like I mentioned. I mentioned the green steel, and I mentioned aviation fuel. I mean, these are sort of long-standing. I mentioned the agriculture around beef. There are some promising innovations, and those are just 3 that I talked about today. There's a lot more, right? There are some very exciting innovations, and these sectors, these sort of hard to abate sectors, contribute about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. We also see companies working on greener chemicals production, greener aluminum, and greener cement. And cement is a big one too, in terms of the built environment. I mentioned steel already, but cement is another big one. But what's complicated is that we know that new innovations are essential. Like, it's just vital. We're not going to get there with the technologies that we've had, that we've had available to us. We have to have new innovations. And there's a funding problem. There's a funding gap. So Deloitte estimated that there was about a $2 trillion funding gap for next generation technologies. I happen to have a friend, a very good friend of mine. She's a venture capitalist. She focuses entirely on what she calls the missing middle in the funding, sort of the sort of idea to scale. There's a huge problem there because it takes many years to get a lot of these technologies up and running. I mean, there's not a 3 or 5 year return on investment for an investor. It's a 30-year return on investment. And a lot of investment companies are not geared for that kind of, they're not structured for that. They're structured for a 3 to 5 year return on investment, maybe 10 years on the outside, but 30 years is not the way that their partners, that's not what their partners have bought into. So it's going to require a combination of public and private investors working together, sort of funding, figuring out funding ways of funding to scale up. There's also, there are some venture investors who can take the longer view, and they're, engaged in partnerships with higher education, with academic institutions like MIT. And in the United States, we had legislation in 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act, and that led to a big influx of public and private investment in clean technologies. But we have a new president now. Perhaps you've heard of that. And he calls that, the green new scam, and he's looking at getting rid of that. So that's problematic in terms of the need for funding, collaborative funding models with the private sector and the public sector. If we don't have the political support, we'll take some steps back. I'll put it that way.
Deixa eu aproveitar que você tocou no assunto do governo, do Trump, né? Eu queria abordar uma questão que a gente tem muita curiosidade. Os Estados Unidos sempre foi uma referência em tecnologia, né, inovação, sempre foi um dos propulsores do mundo nesse aspecto. E a gente viu uma mudança, pelo menos no discurso, né, do governo Trump a respeito da abordagem com as universidades, o acesso a estrangeiros a universidades americanas. Como é que você vê o impacto dessas mudanças na inovação, na evolução da tecnologia, na inclusão digital? Como é que você vê esse aspecto?
Well, look, you remember I said I was an optimist. And this time is really testing my natural tendency towards optimism. I do feel very, what I see from the perspective of living in the greater Boston area, in and around institutions of higher learning that have produced tremendous, groundbreaking research that has improved all of our lives. I find what is happening to be incredibly alarming. And, the United States, I mean, as an American, it's an awkward thing for me to say. My understanding, the perception I believe to be a reality, but I don't mean to sound like I think I'm from the greatest place in the world. I'm not saying that. But the United States and research universities like MIT and Harvard, et cetera, have been places where the greatest, the good and the great and the smartest minds have wanted to go and to be a part of and to learn from one another. And the idea that we are going to disallow the entry of the most talented people in the world who want to be a part of the ecosystem of innovation and creativity and advancement that has, existed in the United States for many decades, since, probably World War II. The idea that we're going to keep people out, to me, just seems so short-sighted. And I probably have other adjectives I could use that I won't. But it's alarming. It's alarming for all of us who are paying attention, because if I am a parent, but if I was a parent here in Brazil and my talented young person wanted to go to university in the United States, and there was a risk that they may not be able to finish their degree, I might say, why don't you go somewhere else? Why don't you go to England, or somewhere in Europe, or wherever? I don't know. Lots of other opportunities, because the potential for their lives to be disrupted in a way that might be hard to adjust to feels like a risk that, as a parent, I'm not sure I would be so excited for my child to take. What does that mean for higher education and innovation in the United States? I think is, again, I said I'm an optimist. I don't, this is not going to last forever. It's not. It's about 6 months in. We've got 3.5 more years to go. This will, this community, this sort of innovation sort of beating heart will beat again. There are so many people who are way more intelligent and learned and savvy and politically cognizant than I am, who are spending night and day trying to figure out how to stop the Trump administration from making these happen, but also how to continue to nurture this sort of ecosystem long after Donald Trump has moved on to his next activity.
É uma boa questão. Assim, olhando agora sobre o aspecto global mesmo, né, um pouquinho do que a gente falou sobre o avanço dos Estados Unidos em tecnologia, sobre os impactos, a gente vê uma corrida global por tecnologia, mas mais recentemente, especificamente a gente vê avanços na China, Índia, alguns países da Ásia, mas eu queria, numa última questão, trazer você um olhar sobre o Brasil. Somos um país também grande, também importante no cenário global, a gente também quer se posicionar do ponto de vista tecnológico. Como é que você vê, na sua visão, como é que a gente pode se preparar, como é que o Brasil pode se preparar para ser esse protagonista também nessas evoluções tecnológicas e nesse cenário global de inovação?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you and I were talking before we came out here about just the very unique and incredibly diverse nature of the Brazilian people, right? People who've come here from countries all over the world, this melting pot, if you will, and that is an environment that enables talented and motivated and excited people to thrive. This protagonist question, it's very interesting, because from my perspective, Brazil has been a protagonist, certainly in certain areas. Like Brazil was a pioneer in biofuels, in the large-scale production of biofuels, which helped the country to lower greenhouse gas emissions. I understand that there's been a new industrial policy in 2024 focused on putting public resources behind research and innovation and sustainability. I will say, though, just going back to the previous question, I really have to put in a good word for university research as being a source of wild and wonderful new ideas. As I said, we've long, had in the United States a system for science, government funding research in universities. That system is under threat. Brazil wants to, lead. That would seem to be a really smart place to focus on university science, because there are, so many. There's going to be at least for the next 3.5 years, there's going to be a gap, an opportunity for countries like Brazil to, begin to fill in some of that space. And maybe longer, but hopefully not.
Vamos lá, vamos trabalhar para chegar lá, né? Vamos trabalhar juntos para chegar lá. Elizabeth, nós chegamos ao final, nosso tempo acabou, mas eu queria agradecer muito a sua presença, a sua participação, assim, foi muito engrandecedor trazer todo o conhecimento. Quero agradecer a presença de todos, espero que tenham gostado do nosso painel e vão lá olhar o MIT Technology Review, as tendências, é muito rico de informação. Muito obrigado a todos, bom evento.
Thank you.
Quero agradecer a Elizabeth e o Rodrigo por esse painel super instigante. Thank you very much. Obrigada, Rodrigo. Lembrando a todos vocês, todas vocês, que vocês podem avaliar os nossos painéis pelo QR Code que está disponível aqui no telão. Sempre ao fim de cada painel aparece um QR Code. Por favor, avaliem, porque é importante para que a gente faça um FEBRABAN Tech cada vez melhor a cada ano. Então, é muito importante para a gente também.